Hello and welcome back to Explaining Acro. I'm Ben and this is Cassandra, and today we're going to be teaching you hand-to-hand tempos. Hand-to-hand tempos are an excellent drill for standing acrodynamics. They carry over to tricks where we're either catching the flyer in a handstand or throwing the flyer from a handstand, which encompasses a ton of skills in standing acro.
Before working on this skill, we recommend being comfortable with foot-to-hand tempos. This is a skill that we covered just a few weeks ago, and if you haven't done these before, we recommend checking out that video so that you can learn the basics before moving on to hand-to-hand tempos. We also recommend being comfortable pressing or tempoing into extended hand-to-hand in an L-based position. Additionally, we ask that you be comfortable in a standing hand-to-hand and holding that for 10 seconds. One of the main things that I'm thinking about as a flyer in hand-to-hand tempos is holding that handstand shape. And I do this a couple of ways, but really staying strong in the shoulders because the base is going to be pushing. We want to make sure we can meet that push and not collapse. And then additionally, squeezing our body, holding that line as we press to make sure we're following the base's hands and their line and not tipping off of them.
The main things that I'm thinking about as a base for my hand-to-hand tempo are making sure that I'm driving from my legs and not just using my arms. That initial movement should come from knee and hip extension rather than just a press from a dead stop. The other thing that I'm thinking about is making it as easy as possible for my flyer. So I'm making sure that I'm pushing up and in order to stay underneath the flyer's shoulders, and I'm making sure not to collapse my wrists so the flyer feels nice and supported.
For this first drill, we're going to start an extended hand-to-hand in the L-base position. And bases, we're going to get into that hand-to-hand position, and then we're going to slowly bend the arms. It doesn't really matter how much they bend. We recommend maybe like a quarter bend, and then you're going to push back up to extended in a strong position there. Flyers, what we're going to do is we're going to hold that handstand shape and just keep that position as the base lowers and pushes up. And the important thing here for flyers is that we're getting comfortable with movement in our hand-to-hand shape and also seeing how much we need to engage our shoulders to be able to receive that push back from the base.
Bases, our focus here is on moving slowly so that the flyer doesn't feel like the floor is falling out from under them, and really just trying to push up powerfully so the flyer can get an idea of what it's going to feel like to take all of that force. For this next drill, we're going to really be focusing on having the base initiate with leg drive. So for this, we're going to be starting in a hand-to-hand position. The base is going to push the knees out, extend, and let the hands come up only as much as they are pushed by the hips and the knees. From there, we're going to be thinking about controlling the flyer back down and absorbing softly, but we're not explicitly pushing the flyer all the way up. We're really just trying to make sure that we're getting our sequencing correct.
Flyers, this is similar to drill 1, but even more power is going to be coming up through our handstand. So really making sure our shoulders are engaged, that we're wrapping our lats, that we're squeezing this, so that when the base pushes, we aren't bending or caving in the shoulders. Additionally, we really want to make sure we're using the front of our fingers, really engaging the hand and the wrist, so when the base pushes, this doesn't collapse in our handstand. And the last thing for flyers is really squeezing the butt, because often as the base presses up, our feet like to pike a little bit. I know mine definitely do.
Now we're ready to work on the full skill. So bases, this is going to be very similar to before. We're thinking about pushing those knees out, driving with the hips and knees, except this time we're going to extend our arms as well. For the purposes of this drill, we're going to think about just kind of ringing the bell or extending our arms and then starting to bring the flyer straight back down afterwards. The reason for that is it allows us to really better mimic what it's like to catch the flyer in a handstand, whereas if we were to go to extended stay there and then lower, it's going to be a little bit of a different feeling. Some important things to think about as we're receiving the flyer is we want to absorb with our arms and then our legs. If we're bending our legs too early, the flyer is going to kind of come crashing down because we don't really have the ability to absorb. And then finally, as we're catching that flyer, we want to stay down here until it feels nice and quiet. If it's a little bit off balance, you can certainly move, but the thing that we want to avoid is bouncing out of the bottom.
Flyers, this is very similar to drill 2. The only difference is that we're getting even more power and there's more movement in the trick. So it's really important to keep our shoulders engaged in this skill And also really think about squeezing our upper back here in that hand-to-hand position. And what that's doing is it's kind of creating this wall that's locking us in, that's going to keep us from losing the tension in the shoulders as the base pushes. Additionally, as Ben was saying, while bases are learning this trick, common things we see are arms dropping too fast or legs bending too quickly, which for the flyer feels like the platform is dropping from underneath us. So while we're learning this, to keep it safe and to keep it feeling as comfortable as possible, holding our shape is how we're going to do that. And then lastly is just really lean into the front of the fingers, really engage the wrist so that when this pressing motion is happening, your wrist keeps its angle. Even if the base's wrist moves, you can try to fight that with engaging your fingers and wrist.
Yeah, and then just a quick word on spotting. This is very similar to spotting like an extended hand-to-hand, where you want to have a spotter who is substantially taller than the base, or multiple spotters, or ideally spotting lines.
There are a few common flyer errors that we see with hand-to-hand tempos. The first one being not having enough tension generated in the shoulders and upper back, and not having this tension causes energy leaks. So as the base is pushing and transferring their energy into your handstand line, if the shoulders aren't engaged, then the energy is going to kind of go out of your shoulders rather than kind of going all the way up through your toes and using all that power that they've generated. So really engaging those shoulders to stay on top of the base and to take that power. The second common error we often see is flyers piking or not squeezing their glutes in the hand-to-hand tempo. And the platform is slightly shifting, so there is movement in this skill, which means we have to fight that much harder to hold our shape against that movement. So for me, that means as the base is pressing and as I'm coming back down, I'm really thinking about squeezing my glutes, keeping those hips open to prevent them from piking down. The final common error that we see with flyers, and including myself, is really needing to engage the hands. Because this skill likes to fall behind the base for me, that means that my front fingers like to kind of come off of the base's wrist. So in this skill, I'm really thinking about staying on the front of my hand, really engaging the front of those fingers and holding onto the base the entire skill. Especially down here at the bottom, I'm really pushing into that front wrist to try to keep my weight in line over the base.
The main common errors I see with bases in hand-to-hand tempos are dropping too quickly. If we do this as we're initiating the tempo, the flyer can bounce and you're already setting yourself up to have a very awkward tempo. The other time you can move too early is as you're receiving the flyer. If you drop your legs too quickly, then you really don't have any capacity to absorb the flyer. And then when you're catching someone either from a tempo or out of a trick, it's going to be a really hard landing and not be really comfortable for either party. The final thing that I tend to see is that as the base either presses or receives, the wrist angle will change. We want to make sure that we're keeping this kind of wrist angle constant and being really strong through the fingers the entire time so that we're able to keep the flyer over our wrist bones and our center of mass. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a like and subscribe to the channel so that our channel can continue to grow and you can continue to get more content like this as well as our future videos. If you want more Explaining Acro, check out explainingacro.com and you can learn about the various things that we have to offer as well as some free resources for strength training. Till next time.